Okay, hi guys. This is my lesson for 470, 460, my ELD lesson. The source of literature I selected were the Snow White fables because we're going to talk about the comparing morals between the original Snow White that was written by the Grimm brothers and the Disney version of Snow White, which is a more modern adaptation of Snow White, but how different the morals are in those two stories. So this is for language arts. ELD, I just titled the lesson Morals. Um, the lesson objective is that students will be able to read a classic fable and decide what the moral is and why it is good or a bad moral, and that's definitely a personal. There's no really right or wrong. Like your your morals are so personal that I can't really say it's a good or bad moral. It's a good or bad moral depending on the person. Um, Students will discuss opposing views on morals and why morals might not be the same across the board. Students then will have to justify their own ideas of morals in a reflection. So there'll be a short reflection as my beyond portion, and when students can just discuss what they think is a good moral, why they think is a good moral, what they don't think is a good moral. It's a reflection, so they can write whatever they want. So I left this part blank, but I went into the standards and found a collaborative, interpretive, and productive portion for my content standards. So the collaborative would be exchanging information and ideas with others through oral collaborative discussion on a range of social and academic topics. The interpretive would be reading closely literature and informational texts and viewing media to determine how meaning is conveyed explicitly and implicitly through language. And the productive is justifying your own arguments and evaluating other arguments in writing. So for the learning modalities, we have visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Visual for this one will obviously be, they're going to be reading a story, they're going to be watching a video, and they're going to be collaborating in class with diagrams. So it's very, very visual. Same thing with auditory, they're going to be listening to each other, discussing their own ideas, talking to their partners. And then kinesthetic is they'll be drawing a diagram and they'll be writing a short reflection in which they can also draw a picture associated with the reflection, but I'm trying to keep the reflection more open. So, if they don't want to, they don't have to, but I know for some people it helps to draw a picture to connect the two ideas. Taxonomic objectives, cognitives, students will understand how to identify morals of stories and interpret their own morals from similar stories. Affective, students will be asked to give their own opinion on morals and will have to justify their morals in a reflection and a short discussion in class. Psychomotor, they will have to think about themselves, morals, how they've been taught morals, why are they taught certain morals, and that could be cultural, that could be, just the way your parents are, that could be religious aspects. There's a lot of different things that impact morals and the way you were taught morals. Adaptations for learners. This one was a little, I don't want to say strange, because if I was teaching this lesson, I would give access to the written story, a couple days before, whether I'd put that on the website or give it to them in class to give everybody time to read it and be familiar with it. But I also suggest that they read it in class too, so that just gives everybody ample time to be a little familiar with it. And sometimes you have to read text a couple times to understand it. So I thought it would be good if they could read it beforehand, then come in class and read it again, and then discuss it as a class. So then maybe they picked on something that they didn't read the first time. And I feel like it'll just give everybody a chance to be familiar with it on the same level. And then they're going to be watching a video of Disney Snow White, and I feel like a lot of people are familiar with that already, so that kind of goes into linking with past experiences. I mean, I guess I'm making an assumption that most people know the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The assessment at the end will just be like a short one-page reflection. I put some questions in here that I thought would be good jumping off points, but again, I am not going to stick strictly to that. If the student wants to write one page on their personal values, that's fine. If they want to write like half a page and a picture, that's fine with me too. Like I said, I think reflection should be more reflective and less structured, especially when you're reflecting on something so personal. Another idea would be like, what morals do you see that are super important to somebody else, but maybe not so important to you? Or if there's a story or a fable with a moral that resonates with you the most, like um, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, maybe that really speaks to you because if people lie so often, like eventually nobody believes them. And if you find out that I definitely believe it, I feel like that's definitely true, you can talk about that story, you can draw a picture of a wolf or something. Um, Materials, equipment, and technology needed. Most materials will be materials that are used in an everyday class setting. Students will be drawing a Venn diagram, so either the teacher can provide that, like a pre-made Venn diagram, or just paper so they can draw the two circles. Teacher will need to give access somehow to the story for the students, whether that's links on their iPads. They could pull up the entire story on the projector if they wanted to do popcorn reading like that, or give them individual copies. The other thing that they would need is internet so that they can look up the video that they're going to be watching later. But again, this is all stuff that is everyday. Okay, so getting into the actual lesson, or like the meat of the lesson. Excuse me. They're going to be starting with into. So the teacher will begin by just asking point blank, like an icebreaker, what is a moral? Like, what do you think a moral is? Why is it important? Why do people talk about this stuff all the time? Can morals change over time? Do people change their morals, or are morals something that's just like your core value? Why might other people have different morals than me? Why does Sally over there think one thing and I think, oh, you should never do that, or oh, if you do that sometimes it's fine. Um, as the students answer, I think it'd be good for the teacher to write down some synonyms of morals, like what they might. Some people are like, oh, a moral is a belief. Okay, we're gonna make like a little web and discuss what things moral, the word moral might mean. And I think going into the rationale like that, and I guess this is also related to culturally responsive. All people have different morals, I feel like, to a degree. Cultures have different morals. They have different stories that they tell especially children. Like, we all hear fables and fairy tales, and they all have these hidden messages that when you're a kid you don't really think about, but they're still there and they're still impacting the way you're going to grow up and view the world. And I think that's important, that each culture has their own types of fables with morals, and that's what they tell their children, and that's what their children are going to grow up with. It's important to be able to openly discuss these ideas with each other too, and not necessarily. I mean, you want to be able to defend your ideas and use like persuasive arguing to say, well, no, I believe this because of blah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're putting somebody else down. So it's good to be respectful while still sticking by what you believe. So after they get into this icebreaker, I'll have students break into pairs, and I'm going to do like what we did in class, in our 470 class, and we talked about that little meter that he had us do, where we did it's kind of like a line, and it's a like agree, disagree, or you're indifferent. So maybe they'll break up into pairs or small groups or however the teacher wants to do it. And the first question would be like, I believe all stories have morals. And then everybody writes their spot on the line and what they think. Oh, yes, I definitely agree. All stories have morals, or yeah, some stories don't have morals. Maybe some stories are just funny and they're not really meant to be anything. And then after each question, we'll have the students discuss with each other why they put themselves where on each timeline. The other questions I have are: morals are always good. Morals in stories are always consistent, and talk about why that might or might not be true. Just because we both heard the same story doesn't mean we took the same moral from that story. Okay, the next part is the through part. So the students will read the original story of Snow White, and I emphasize original because that's the Grimm brothers version of Snow White that was written forever ago, and it has a darker ending to it, to say. If you're not familiar with it, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but Snow White actually doesn't just eat an apple. She's poisoned. She's poisoned by an apple at the end, but before that, she gets like a poisoned comb stuck in her hair, and that killed her. And then the dwarves brought her back to life, and then she got corseted too tight. The witch came in and like corseted her so tight that she couldn't breathe. Again, she died. The dwarves came home, found her on the floor, cut her out, and they're like, "Stop letting this lady into our house." And then the third time the witch came, she gave Snow White the apple, and this time it was lodged in her throat, and that's where the dwarves couldn't see what was wrong with her, and they thought she was actually dead. And they put her in a glass coffin because they thought her beauty shouldn't be shielded from anything, and they were going to go put her on a mountainside so that everybody could see her every day. And when they were moving her body, a prince comes along and he basically says, "Hey, that girl's really pretty. I'm going to take her back to my castle." And the dwarves are like, "Well, no." And then he's like, "Yeah, too bad, I'm a prince." And so he starts taking this coffin with this dead girl in it, and he drops it down a mountainside, and the apple gets dislodged from her throat, and she wakes up, and she sees the prince, and they get married. And then once they're married, Snow White brings the Wicked Witch to the castle and takes a really cruel revenge on her. She puts iron shoes on the witch and makes the witch dance until she dies. So obviously that story has a very different ending and different meanings throughout the story as compared to the Disney one, where she just falls in love with the prince, he kisses her, and they live happily ever after. Oh, and the witch, I think, dies from a boulder accident. Anyway, so with those two stories, they're going to draw a Venn diagram. And a Venn diagram is the diagram, two circles, they overlap in the middle. What's similar about these stories? What's different? Which one do they like more? Which one do they think has a better meaning? I said that I think a Venn diagram is a great way to visualize, and I think it is a really good visual tool so students can see, okay, this goes on the left, this goes on the right, and they meet in the middle. What is the same? What is different? So they can pull everything out, and it will help them make comparisons. Culturally, again, students will be able to compare contrasting views to their own and use persuasive language to justify their own ideas. And this will go into, like I said, after the Venn diagram, maybe they'll discuss in partners, and we'll discuss as a whole what we thought were similar and what we thought was different. At the end of the class, and this goes into the dependent side of it, I guess, as that at the end of the class we'll be able to do a group discussion about just the stories in general and how morals have changed and how morals are different to people. I think it's good to have a discussion about the two stories, and just to show like the Grimm brothers version was written, I think in like I don't even know, I want to say like 1800s, but the Disney version of Snow White was like in the 1940s. So even that one's more recent, but even that has morals that are outdated. Um, but these are still stories that we tell our children, even though there's morals. I mean, I guess I personally would find the morals outdated. And so I think it's a great topic for discussion. And I know sometimes when you get into personal things, it can be a touchy subject, but when you're in high school, these are things that, you need to find out what's important to you and find ways to stick by them. And especially for English learners, I think it's important at this stage that they learn persuasive language and how to argue their points using that type of language. And I know I talked about this before. I guess the end would be for homework or at the end of class. This all depends on how long this lesson would take. It might take a couple classes. Students will write a short reflection on morals. I wrote and draw a picture, but again, I said that could be optional. Some students like to draw, some students don't. I don't think this reflection is one that you should have too strict of guidelines, but what do they think? What morals are important to them? What morals do they find not as important, but others might find really important? Or what's a story that you always thought of as a child, like this is a good story, this has a good message. Um, let's see. Yeah, so I guess with culturally responsive, um, it's important to see how morals have evolved over decades. And again, like maybe your morals might be different than your parents' morals, who are different than your grandparents' morals, or maybe they're the same. I don't know. That's something to talk about, and that's something to really look on and reflect in yourself. So, yeah, that is my lesson on morals.